Welcome back, Prabhus. I hope more come, but we have an intimate group. Srila Prabhupada's well-known desire that we cooperate to spread Krishna consciousness to every town and village was more than a farewell request as he was preparing to leave this world. It was a theme he voiced continually during his 12 years of non-stop preaching around the globe. Yet in spite of Prabhupada's mandate that we work together, cooperation can be hard to find in the age of quarrel, where non-cooperation too often prevails. In this key lesson on cooperation, we'll see up close why cooperation can be so elusive, as well as what we can do to foster it. So I chose this slide because this is San Francisco Radhadesh 1974, a famous picture taken by our Vishaka Devi. And there are some very strong-minded people in this photo, leaders, sannyasis, temple presidents, and they don't necessarily get along by nature. But with Prabhupada at the center there, especially this ecstatic occasion, there they are. immersed in kirtan ras, the safest place to be in the material world. You may have seen the movies too, where when Prabhupada does that, when he raises his arms, everybody raises their arms and they start jumping out of their skins. And even the 10,000 strong people in Golden Gate Park who weren't even devotees, as soon as they saw Prabhupada raise his arms, they raised their arms. So that's Prabhupada's potency. Okay, to love is to cooperate. Here is Tamal Krishna Maharaj, Shukarari Maharaj, Guru Kripa Maharaj, Bhagavad Prabhu, Tulsi Das Prabhu, Jayatirtha Prabhu. Anyway, they're all leaders, and they all have very different natures. But with Prabhupada at the center, they're happy. Okay. Yeah. By May 1977, Srila Prabhupada's health had been declining for months. It was time to return to Vrindavan, India, his quote, home, as he called it, to recover or to depart. When his secretary suggested he make a will, Prabhupada agreed. For 7 years, Srila Prabhupada had been training the members of ISKCON's governing body commission to manage the society after his departure. To help them feel the gravity of that responsibility, Prabhupada requested they all come to Vrindavan to witness the will. Quote, because they love you, said his secretary, Tamal Krishna Maharaj, I'm sure they will all want to come and be with you. Prabhupada's reply was grave. Let's get the
mic here.
All right. Let's start us off.
Your love for me, said Srila Prabhupada, will be shown by how much you cooperate to keep this institution together after I'm gone.
Tamal Krishna Maharaj is very upbeat and blissful, and Prabhupada just looked at him and said gravely that famous, which became a famous quote, enshrined in many temples. Notwithstanding Prabhupada's statement, cooperation can be elusive in our age of quarrel. To see why, as well as what we can do to foster cooperation, we will sample Prabhupada's words on the subject, which reveal a simple yet challenging logic. So what follows is a kind of, the term dialectic. There's thesis, antithesis, synthesis, or point, counterpoint, resolution, however you want to put it. And so Prabhupada's thesis is cooperate. Despite Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's order that his leading disciples, quote, work conjointly, and, quote, without any quarrel, after his demise, their non-cooperation fragmented the Gaudiya mission and later disqualified most of them from helping Prabhupada revive it in the West. Determined that non-cooperation not similarly spoil his ISKCON, Prabhupada often defined and tested his disciples' devotion in terms of their willingness to work together. Quote, when you do something in cooperation with the Lord, that is called bhakti. So he defines bhakti as a willingness to cooperate. And, quote, the test of our actual dedication and sincerity to serve the spiritual master will be in this mutual cooperative spirit to push on this movement and not make factions and deviate, which is kind of the human condition. If I don't get my way, I stalk off mad and either just isolate or try to make my own thing. So that's not helpful. If Prabhupada's thesis is to cooperate, then what is his antithesis, his philosophical contrast? Okay. Yes. Okay, cooperate, but don't expect utopia. Don't expect it's going to be easy, right? Everybody's smiling, everybody gets along. No, that's not the way it works. A couple of years after Prabhupada had formed the GBC, one of its members wrote to complain that impersonal dealings were dividing his colleagues. Prabhupada disagreed. Okay.
It is not so much that there may be some fault in our God brothers and God sisters, or because there may be some mismanagement or lack of cooperation, that this is due to being impersonalist. No, it is the nature of the living condition to always have some fault.
Ooh.
Even in the spiritual world, there is some fault and envy. But it's not the same as material fault or material envy. It is transcendental, because it's all based on Krishna. Sometimes when one gopi would serve Krishna very nicely, the others would say, "Oh, she has done so nicely. Now let me do better for pleasing Krishna." That is envy. But it's transcendental, without malice.
That's like unheard of, right? Envy without malice. Because you don't find that in the material world. Envy means basically hate. I'm going to cut you down. So this is transcendental envy. Shikopi does, oh, okay. She's done so nicely. So now let me do better. It's like a mutual competition to please Krishna. Krishna is the center of it. It's not a mutual tearing down. It's a spiral upward, not a spiral down. Okay, go ahead.
So we shall not expect that anywhere there is any utopia. Rather, that is impersonalism.
That's impersonalism.
Because devotees are persons, therefore there will always be some lacking. But the difference is that their lackings have become transcendental because their topmost intention is to serve Krishna.
So then the letter goes on, and Prabhupada, he just really wants to make sure that his disciple who's serving as a GBC himself, Acharya Rishi Prabhu from Iran, gets it. So listen to this. This is how Prabhupada ends the letter. The devotees of Krishna are the most exalted persons on this planet. Better than kings, all of them. So he's telling Acharya, look, don't stop criticizing him. Stop dissing him as being personalists. No, they're better than kings. So we should always remember that. And like the bumblebee, always look for the nectar or the best qualities of a person. Not like the utopians, who are like the flies, who always go to the open sores or find the faults in a person. And because they cannot find any utopia, or because they cannot find anyone without faults, they want to become void, merge, nothing. They think that is utopia, to become void of personality. So it was like, in jiu-jitsu, you know how to use your opponent's negative energy against him, you turn it around. So Prabhupada's taking that negativity from Acharya, and he's challenging him to see his godbrothers in a new light. Be a bee, not a fly. See the best and not the worst. So, if Prabhupada's thesis, let's see here, I think maybe we've got to look at that. Because Prabhupada said at one point, there's always some fault, even in the spiritual world, there's conflict. look at the bottom picture, they're all pure devotees there, and they're fighting. Krura has come from Mathura to take Krishna and Balaram away. This is the Leela and the killing of Kamsa. But the gopis are saying, it's like, over our dead bodies you are, you're not taking Krishna and Balaram out of Vrindavan, forget it. So, Krura is a pure devotee, and the gopis are pure devotees. Cooperate. This is resolution. You heard it. Try to find out more. This. Yes. So in February 72, and in October 73, another GBC wrote Prabhupada, and also reported there's ascension among the ranks. At the highest levels of management. So you see, and wrote to inform Prabhupada of ascension to the ranks. Prabhupada's response was philosophical and proactive.
Cannot come into agreement with the varieties. But if we keep Krishna in the center, then there will be agreement in varieties. This is called unity in diversity. I am therefore suggesting that all men meet in Mayapur every year.
You just say the GBC, and he said men, but where Prabhupada is raised, men includes women, it doesn't just mean males. Okay, read the next. Oh, it's a continuation of the same sentence.
Oh, okay.
In
Oh,
Dutch,
man.
it's the same thing.
Every year,
In Dutch, it's the same thing.
during the birth anniversary of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, with all GBC and senior men present, we should discuss how to make unity in diversity.
All right, it's been sloganized to death. Yes, for those we need unity in diversity, but it's not easy. As Prabhupada knew, and time has shown us, finding unity in diversity is an ongoing challenge. So let's explore how to do that. So at least we know theoretically how to approach it. Okay.
Unity around principles.
Unite.
So unite around principles, diversify the details.
Unite around principles and diversify the applications, the details. Since achieving unity and diversity is the key to cooperation, Prabhupada's measure of our love for him, we need to dig deeper into his life, teachings, mood, and mission to find it. We need to identify timeless, universal principles whose details will vary according to, quote, country, time, and candidate.
The teacher, Acharya, has to consider time, candidate, and country. What is possible in one country might not be possible in another. The Acharya's duty is to accept the essence of devotional service, it is not necessary that the rules and regulations followed in India be exactly the same as those in Europe, America, and other Western countries. What is required is a special technique according to country, time, and candidate.
Yeah, I referred to this before, CC Budget 23105, but I really encourage you to look at that purport. And also Bhagavatam 4.8.54, and you see how the same Prabhupada who said impossible is a word in a fool's dictionary in another context, in connection with 17 books in 2 months publishing. He said here it's not possible to do what's possible in one country, may not be possible in another. So don't try to force a round peg into a square hole, or round peg into a square hole, something like that. Okay. I'm sure Urmila Prabhu will talk about that too. Of course, even if the Acharyas, because then Prabhupada, he made this kind of mystery, he says, what is required is a special technique according to country, time, and candidate. So what does that mean, special technique? Of course, even if the Acharya's special technique proves effective for spreading Krishna consciousness, advanced devotees may still disagree on the details of applying universal principles. So now we're going deeper. So principles and details. This is all in the service of figuring out how to cooperate, or finding that cooperation which eludes us. For example, while receiving a massage from his assistant one day, Prabhupada remarked, so this is October 72, Sri Kirti and Srila Prabhupada are in Manila, the Philippines. And so the backstory is this, that in March of the same year, 72, Prabhupada broke ground for the Mayapur project. Deval Krishna Maharaj and others had secured the land. Prabhupada had the deeds in the previous fall, and then by March, Prabhupada was ready to break ground. And so they invited a lot of Gopars when we go to the former, Gaudiya mission. They were all, carrying on individually in their own huts. And a lot of them came to see what Swami Maharaj was up to. Some of them had even tried to prevent Prabhupada from getting the land. And I don't know if those godbrothers came, but anyway, there's pictures, you might have seen pictures of Prabhupada breaking ground. You have seen him going down into the pit to install an Antashation. So on the one hand, they appreciated what Swami Maharaj was doing because it wasn't a big festival. The first big one was in 74, but there were Western disciples there. The Prabhupada had miraculously changed Lechas and Yavadas into aspiring Vaishnavas. So, on the one hand, they appreciated that. On the other hand, they had some complaints. So, the complaints were, why are you letting them call you Prabhupada? This is for our Guru Maharaj and Rupa Goswami and that kind of person. So Prabhupada said, Brahmananda Maharaj, get my stationery. So Brahmananda brought a piece of stationery, and there on his stationery, his own personal stationery, it said, Tridandi Goswami, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, no Prabhupada there. So I'm not calling myself Prabhupada, but of course, as we know from 1968, when Govinda Dasi said, we need 3, so which one is the best? And Prabhupada said, Srila Prabhupada is the best. So Prabhupada did allow us to call him that. And so Prabhupada, you know, he couldn't, at least he wasn't calling himself Prabhupada that. And then he told us later, you know, for all their complaints, because he had to start a fresh branch. He had to be our Prabhupada, he had to be the founder of Acharya, he had to be the master at whose feet all gurus sit, because he knew there was going to be a multiple guru culture after he left. And he still had to be the center. So he told us, you know, for all their complaints, they haven't advanced Mahaprabhu's movement 1 inch. They just sit in their butts, you know. And anyway, they kind of dropped that because they had a bigger complaint. Swami Maharaj, why are you allowing men and women to serve together in your temples? Don't you know? Of course Prabhupada knew. What Narada Muni is telling Maharaj Yudhishthira in the 7th canto of Bhagavatam, and it is a principle. The principle is, the man is like a butter pot and the woman is like fire, and you put the butter pot too close to the fire and the butter's going to melt. That's a principle. It's a law of nature. Can't. And of course, in our temples, it's not free for all. There's etiquette, but we are serving together, and Prabhupada called it double power. So Prabhupada tried to explain to them, look, when I came to the West, which they were willing to do, when I came to the West, what did I find? From the time they're toddlers, they're freely mixing. Then they go to the same schools, they're educated together, and educated the same way. You know, from K through 12 and up to university. So, you know, what's he supposed to do? Deny half the human race access to the mercy of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu? No. And had scandalous things happened? Yes, scandalous things had already happened from the start. From, you know, 2nd Avenue and Haight-Ashbury and, you know, scandalous things were happening and scandalous things would happen. But Prabhupada is operating in a higher principle than the fire butter principle. He knows that, and he knows the risks he's taking, and he knows things would happen. But he's determined to spread Krishna consciousness to every town and village, or to every continent at least, to spread it all over the world. And he knows that this is going to require the men and the women. And you'll see this more even later as it goes on. So, yeah. Okay, so that's the backstory in March. Now, Srila Prabhupada, as servants like Abhiram Prabhu and Srila Kirti and Harishari and Tamal Krishna Maharaj would say sometimes in their memories, Prabhupada had a way of starting a conversation, and then something else would come up, and that conversation would take a different turn. It would break. It was like a break in a tape or something, and it was on to something else. But then Prabhupada, he had a way of coming back to the conversation and picking it up right in practically the same sentence he left off. He remembered where he was. So anyway, there they are. Srila Kirti was there in March, you know, with Prabhupada. He witnessed the whole thing. And there they are in Manila, 7 months later. And here's what happens. Prabhupada picks up the conversation from March. This fly, I guess everybody wants to hear too, huh? Okay. Okay, so we started by this slide. While receiving a massage from his assistant one day, Prabhupada remarked, so who's got the mic?
Yes.
Okay, there you go.
On principles and details.
Oh, wait a minute. I guess I gotta read first. Okay, hang on just. hanging there for a while, we'll get to you in a sec. Yeah, so Prabhupada starts by saying, my godbrothers criticized me. He just said it apparently out of the blue, but he's picking up from March. My godbrothers criticized me that I have allowed women to live in our temples. This is not done in India. Okay. This is not done in India. But I have become successful because I made this adjustment. For Prabhupada, it was an adjustable detail. It wasn't a principle. Or at least it was a lower principle. The fire butter thing. I have become successful because I made this adjustment. I have combined the men and the women to live together in the same temples, the same communities, the same projects. He's attributing that to he's attributing his success to that. Whoa. All right. And now we have Ramananda Prabhu.
In the silence that followed, his assistant, the Shuddha,
There's a phone on again? You got a phone for me? Is it on? Just turn it on. It's messing with the mic.
in the silence that followed, his assistant Shuddha Prabhu felt compelled to ask, Prabhupada, how can we tell the difference between making an adjustment and changing a principle?
Ooh, there's the $180 million question, right? Which is another source of most of our disagreements in this guy. What's an unchangeable principle and what's an adjustable detail? No small thing to know that. Yeah, the way Sridhar tells it, and what is the difficulty? He said, I was behind Prabhupada and I am massaging him. And Prabhupada, he's facing away, so I couldn't see his expressions. So I asked that question that you see there. How can we tell the difference between making an adjustment and changing the principle in these massagings? And then Prabhupada doesn't answer right away. And he doesn't see Prabhupada's expression, he just hears, you know. That's the Prabhupada. Professorial, critical intelligence.
How big Prabhupada is one?
So, yeah, Prabhupada knew how to respond to anything. You know? That's all right. You keep trying. Yeah, it'll go away. And then see, that's what I wish. Okay. So that's how they were just chanting. The chanting. And then, you know, this very good boy. I thought you so doing that, he was somehow or other, get them to be Krishna conscious, get their minds on Krishna. Come in, you're all welcome. Thank you. Fix their minds on Krishna. Sarve vidhi, all the vidhis, all the rules and regulations of Shastra should be maid servants, should serve this highest principle of making them Krishna conscious. Don't make the rules first. Don't make the taboos first. Stress the positives. And then when you stress the higher taste, then the lower taste goes away. Albeit gradually. It's like, come on, yeah. So that's Prabhupada's policy. Okay. For instance, in Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's Gaudiya mission, here's an example of adjusting things. Many devotees used to chant 64 rounds of the Hare Krishna mantra on their beads. Now, I thought that everybody in the Gaudiya Math chanted 64. That's what I thought, because I heard that. Prabhupada said that. But it wasn't like that. How many rounds did Prabhupada chant? You know? 16 rounds, because he was a full-time, he was a householder with family and work responsibilities. So he, for the householders working full-time, 16. For the full-time preachers who were out in the field, also 16. It was only for the mutt devotees, the people who stayed back at the temple. Their sacrifice was taking care of the monk, which is a very important responsibility, but also they had this, they had more time, so they chanted 64. And then, do you know how Prabhupada chanted the 16 rounds? Maharishari is told 4, 4, 4, 4. He chanted 4 when he got up. He wouldn't let himself eat breakfast until he chanted 4 more. He wouldn't take his midday meal until he chanted 4 more. And then he wouldn't take his supper until he had chanted 4 more. So in this way, 4, 4, 4, 4. That's what he told Harishavar. Okay, now, so on the eve of the first initiation, when they were stringing their beads at 26th Avenue, there were no beads. They went to Tandy's bead shop around the corner and got these big colored beads, and they bought some string, and they were Prabhupada showed just to make it, you know, and they were beads with holes in them, so that they had to put the string through the holes and then knot it after each bead. So they were homemade beads. Nobody knew about Tulsi beads or going to India yet. It was just brand new. So then, while they were stringing their beads, Prabhupada Swamiji told them, So, in my spiritual master's mission, many devotees used to chant 64 rounds. And then, I write here, despite Prabhupada suggesting fewer rounds to his first followers, because when he said that, and he said, but I think you can just chant 32. And then the devotees were like, what? that would take all day, you know. And then Prabhupada said, then 25. And still they were like, what? This is too much. They still looked perplexed after Prabhupada said 25. That would take forever. Prabhupada then declared 16 rounds daily, the rock bottom minimum for his initiated disciples. So that's where it comes from. Prabhupada shooting high and then coming down to 16. When one of those early initiates, so 3 years later, Brahmananda, who became the first temple president in ISKCON, the first CP in New York City, 26 2nd Avenue, when one of those early initiates later asked Prabhupada why he had asked them to chant so many rounds, then reduced the number. This is in the book called Swamiji, that Brahmananda wrote with Satyaraj. Then reduced the number. Prabhupada replied that he was, quote, experimenting to see what the devotees could actually do. To determine a principle's practical application, a detail, Prabhupada would often try something out and then Pabena Purachiyate, judged by the result. If the result was good, then he kept it. And if the result wasn't good, he stopped it. Have I talked to you about our rock opera project? Have I talked to you about the Uganda Trust Party for Purified Leaders? So, in ISKCON's history in the 70s, in the early 70s, there were 2 initiatives that Prabhupada allowed because it was in us. We came from the counterculture and we had rock operas. The Who from England had Tommy, that was a rock opera. And there were others. And many of us in the counterculture had been politically very active, protest. So we wanted to do an alternative political party. And Prabhupada, he said, okay, let's give it a try. So in both cases, he let us try it, but then when it got out of hand, when it became counterproductive to the main thrust of his mission, which is book production and distribution, deity worship, and well, as we know, there were attempts, rural community development, festivals. When it became counterproductive to the main activities, then he would stop it. So in the case of the rock opera, it started in New Vrindavan, and then the troupe went down south for the winter, and then the leader who was leading it had to leave the party because New Vrindavan was falling apart in his absence, so he had to go back to New Vrindavan to save it. And then a new leader came in, but he was not as disciplined. He wasn't the disciplinarian the first leader had been. And this rock opera had men and women serving together in the party. So it was fun, and it was spreading Krishna consciousness in a dynamic new way. It was drama and music and playing college campuses and churches and venues that the devotees hadn't been. It wasn't chanting on the streets. It was an expansion. It was more than that. And Prabhupada liked that. But then what happened was, when after the new leader came in after some months, it got kind of loose between the men and the women. Prabhupada nipped it, stopped it. After the new leader felt that the project had run its course, he said, Srila Prabhupada, We found some land in Long Island. We'd like to settle down with the troop and make a yoga village. And there's nothing wrong with that idea. But Prabhupada, knowing his disciples and their level of maturity, or lack of it, said, no, better you don't do that. This will become another hippie addition. Because that's, we came from the counterculture where there was all kinds of intentional communities springing up. And most of them, were unprincipled. So he stopped it. And in the case of the God We Trust Party for Purified Leaders, devotees are running for office. Balavanta ran for mayor of Atlanta, Amarendra ran for mayor of Gainesville, Nalini Kanta ran for mayor of Tucson, and Damodar ran for Congress in DC. And because Amarendra, I was serving in Gainesville at the time, where Amarendra was the TP, and he had been a real radical, protester in the 60s. And he had the scars to prove it from the cops when he had been clubbed. So anyway, so he was running for mayor of Gainesville. And somehow Gainesville became the center of the meetings. Rupanuga Maharaj at the time was the sannyasi kind of overseer of the party. And you can hear recordings where Prabhupada's bragging about, we have our God We Trust Party for Purified Leaders, and they're getting on television and radio and public events, and they're appearing, and Prabhupada said, suit, tie, and tilak and flag. Talking about the shikha and flag. Tilak and flag. And they're preaching, what are they? They're preaching the regulative principles. If you want purified leaders, they have to be principled people. You can't expect good policies to come from low-class people. So then the first election cycle came around. And like in Gainesville, there was a field of 6 candidates running for mayor. There was the incumbent, and then 5 other parties, and we were the God We Trust Party. And then the election happened, and we didn't win, but we didn't come in last either. We were 5th in a field of 6. Number 6, the party that got the least votes was the Libertarian Party, which was a kind of anarchist party. We don't need a mayor, no government. So, nobody won anything. So even though Prabhupada, he liked the preaching, then Rupanuga wrote a letter to Prabhupada and said, Srila Prabhupada, and the BBT was funding this. There was a grant for the BBT, and Prabhupada thought it was a good idea. We're going to get in the media and exposure. For the next election cycle, for the next campaigns, we need a $30,000 grant from the BBT. And so, which in 1970s, $30,000, worth a lot more now. So Prabhupada said, no, enough is enough. We don't mind getting the post, winning, but not at the cost of our God consciousness. Because what had happened was, in Gainesville, for example, I remember the day when Rupanuga's chief whip, this devotee, this brahmachari, who will remain anonymous, he said, Prabhus, today we are no longer ISKCON Gainesville. We are Gainesville in God We Trust. And so it wasn't just a formal change of name. It was like the book distribution suffered, the deity worship suffered, the round suffered. We were becoming political animals, just going around with clipboards, and we were losing it because we were too immature. There's nothing wrong per se. I mean, in 2020 we had a devotee running for president of the United States, Tulsi Gabbard. Nothing per se wrong about being in politics, but you have to know how to handle it. Yeah. So So Prabhupada would try things. And when he saw, we couldn't handle these things. And then we were actually so relieved when Prabhupada stopped it. We were out at, where were we? Yeah, we were actually out at traveling second time. We were out there. And then Amarendra called and said, come on home, boys, we're going to have a party, we're going to celebrate. Prabhupada just stopped the Acharya Trust party. So we all came home and had a big celebration that we're back to his congregation. So, yeah. Okay, so let's go to, we're getting toward the end here. And humility helps. Okay. At one point, while instructing Sanatana Goswami, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu stopped to marvel at his humble disciple. So this is from CC Madhya 2105. Quote, this is Lord Chaitanya. Since you possess Lord Krishna's potency, you certainly know these things. Because Sanatana's asking him questions, right? Sanatana Shiksha. And Lord Chaitanya is answering, but then Lord Chaitanya kind of calls a time out and he says, since you possess Lord Krishna's potency, you certainly know these things. However, it is the nature of a sadhu to inquire. Although he knows these things, the sadhu inquires for the sake of strictness. Now, Prabhupada did not purport that verse, but in New York, on the 11th of July, 76, he did give an oral purport, and here's a little excerpt. Quote, a sadhu, a saintly person, although he knows everything, still he remains very humble and tries to confirm from the higher authorities. I think this is right. Is it not right? He knows it is all right, but still he waits for the higher authorities to confirm it. Unquote. Strict, now I say, strict in remembering their absolute smallness, strict in never presuming they know everything. Humble devotees are always glad to hear from one another. Not just Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu or Prabhupada. Anybody who's serious and sincere, they want to hear their perspective. And to see each other as Prabhus or masters. Because they trust one another's intentions, they are happy to cooperate, even if they sometimes disagree. So we're going to give the last word to Prabhupada on cooperation. There is audio for this, but there must have been I cut it out because there's an annoying buzz that must have been built. It must have been a bad mic that they were using. And here's the context for this quote. So there's Mayapur, there's Prabhupada in Mayapur, and there's a young Yadavar fanning Mayapur. There's a younger Radhananda Swami, and with his back to us and his staff, that's a young Patrasraveda Swami. So anyway, in 75, that's what we used to call the Christmas Marathon. Tamal Krishna Maharaj's Radha Brahmacharis, in the most successful Brahmachari party, 100 Brahmacharis in multiple buses and vans covering America. They won the marathon. They beat LA. So, and Prabhupada was always inciting the competition. So, as a reward to his men, he said, okay, men, we're all going to Mayapur now for the 76th festival. And I'll see to it that you all get personal darshan of Srila Prabhupada in his rooms in the Lotus Building in Mayapur. And that's not a big room, that darshan room, but they all somehow crammed in. And so, of course, Prabhupada appreciated their service, but you know what he made the theme of his welcoming and his talk? It was all about cooperation. Yeah, he didn't just pat them on the back and ask them how they did it. And I mean, he used to do that too. He always loved to hear from them. distributors, what they're saying and how it worked, and, But in this case, in the Holy Dham, Prabhupada talked about cooperation. Who's got the mic? All right. Here we go.
Love is to cooperate. Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he is God himself, Krishna himself. He felt alone, unable to do this task. He felt. So this is the position. You are cooperating, therefore I am getting the credit. Otherwise, alone, what could I do? Chaitanya Mahaprabhu himself wanted our cooperation. He is God, Krishna. And therefore, cooperation is a very important thing. Nobody should think that I have got so great ability I can do. No, it is simple. By cooperation, we can do very...
It is simply.
It's simpler.
Simply
by cooperation, we can do very big things. United, we stand. Divided, we fail. Fall. Sankirtan means many men combined together, chanting, that is Sankirtan. Otherwise, Kirtan, Sankirtan means many combined together. That is Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's mission.
Yeah. He also gave the example of the bundle of sticks. Bundle of sticks, it was an Aesop's fable, I think. You can easily take a stick out and break it, but you can't break the bundle because there's strength in numbers. So that's why Prabhupada wanted us to stick together despite all our differences. And it's not easy to find unity and diversity and know a principle from the detail, know a higher principle from a lower principle. But that's how we find unity and diversity. Okay, let's go to the learning outcomes. So we do have 25 minutes until Arti. Who's going to read the learning outcomes? Go ahead.
Lesson 8 to love is to cooperate learning outcomes, but now we should be able to recall what Srila Prabhupada said would be the proof of our love for him after he departed this world. Explain why Srila Prabhupada said we shouldn't expect utopia. Identify what Srila Prabhupada meant by unity in diversity. Explain what it means to unite around principles and diversify details. Recall how Srila Prabhupada determined relative application of a universal principle. Recall why Srila Prabhupada said cooperation was so important for spreading Krishna consciousness.
Yeah. Right. Okay. So those questions, comments, reflections? Yes. Is it bright out here? I see. Is it okay?
So the full statement is, the love will be shown to me, how you cooperate in spreading Krishna consciousness.
To keep this institution
To keep
together
this institution together.
after I'm gone.
With the goal of spreading Krishna consciousness.
There's actually two statements, and they both say it, so you might be combining two. First, Prabhupada said one after Kamal said, they love you so much, and then Prabhupada said, it was on the slide. Let's look at the slide again. Together after I mean, because the institution, that's the power power is being together in an institute. You've got to be organized. And as soon as you get organized, there's bureaucracy. Oh no, but what can you do? You need to manage it somehow. So that came from Bhakti Vinod and Bhakti Siddhanta. So Prabhupada once, he knows we need an institution to spread it all over the world. It's not the work of one guru and God family. It's the work of many combined together. Some kirtan, as Prabhupada said.
Yeah, so the argument, what I hear, is that if they don't follow Srila Prabhupada, then why should I cooperate with them?
Yeah. Did I tell you the Hawaii story about that?
About what they found in the fridge? Or?
No. Well, that's New York. Okay, 1975. I like to answer by telling stories because if the story is apt. Okay, so there was two kind of feisty devotees. They were both astrologers, actually. And they're, I think one might have passed away, but one's doing better. Anyway, so they came to Prabhupada in Hawaii, in Prabhupada's rooms, which I know well because I lived in Hawaii for 10 years, and my service was to take care of Prabhupada's rooms. Very nice. And so they were with Prabhupada in his room, at his low table, was typical Prabhupada setup. And there were GBCs there. And these devotees said the same thing. Srila Prabhupada, we follow you, but we can't work with them. Right? So the GBCs were sitting right there, and the complainers were right there. So here's Prabhupada's way of resolving it. So if I say to you to do what they say according to the GBC, will you do it? And they said, no. So there you go. It's a surrender to live in an institution. Prabhupada does want, what did he say? Independence, thoughtful people, what's the phrase? Independently thoughtful devotees. He wants that. But he doesn't want that those independently thoughtful devotees to be so independently thoughtful that they can't work with the institution. And sometimes the institution will decide things that we think is off the wall. Okay, well that will be seen in time. If it's really off the wall, if it's really going to take us away from Prabhupada's mood and mission, then it won't work. And they'll change their resolution because they're sincere too. Just that sometimes they just don't get it, right? Won't get it right. So it's a real challenge to have a strong governing body with authority and good example. Or at least now, in those days, there was no such thing as a GBC. You've heard of the GBC college? There's an institution, a school now, training GBCs. What a concept, right? Training. Of course, but it was the only training in Prabhupada's time. Was Prabhupada would, he would tell them things, and then they'd make mistakes, and then he would correct them, and then they'd make more mistakes, and then. So by the time Prabhupada, left, he was still in anxiety. Is this movement going to go on? Because he was managing right up to the end. We were too neophyte. Even his trusted leaders were too neophyte to manage it. We'll see that in the next lesson. Yeah. So, and then sometimes the argument, you probably heard this one too. Prabhupada was living outside the Gaudiya Math. They didn't follow Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's wishes to make a GBC, by the way, that was his wish. They just had competing camps to who's going to replace Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, totally bogus. So as Prabhupada said, they all fell down because they weren't authorized. So the argument is, Prabhupada was aloof, so I'm aloof now. It's really a bogus argument because at least we have a governing body sincerely trying, as you know from your Hridaya Chaitanya Prabhu. And you think Hridaya Chaitanya Prabhu is like those bogus camps that were trying to replace Bhaktisiddhanta? No, he's a very sincere servant of Srila Prabhupada's movement. So the GBCs are very sincere, and over the years they've seen the need for help, and they've created the Sabha, which I'm part of, and they've created deputies, and they've created this Shastric Advisory Committee, which Urmila chairs. Urmila. So, it's a work in progress. So again, be the change you want to see in this town, don't just complain. Be critical, think critically, but don't be destructively critical. And just as Prabhupada said earlier in this lesson, make factions and deviate. Don't do that. Don't make factions and deviate. That's easier said than done. Sometimes Prabhupada's solution is if leaders couldn't get along, but they were sincere, but they just couldn't get along. Those modes just... So Prabhupada would send them to different sides of the world. So you go over here, you go way over there, and they flourished because they had their own turf, right? And they did things their way for Prabhupada. One GDC complained once that, this other GDC, Srila Prabhupada is not sending anything to your book fund in his zone. And of course, the complainer was sending the most of anybody, and he was kind of proud. I mean, it's sincere, but the pride came out. So Prabhupada wrote him back and put him in his place. He said, yes, he's not sending anything to the book fund because I've given him something different to do. I've told him to develop plain living and high thinking and to build 7 temples on 7 hills in West Virginia. Can you do that? No. So we have to become like the bee and not like the fly, and go for the fall, and go for the honey, the nectar, the best parts of the person, and not. It's our tendency in Kali Yuga. It's to go for the faults. So it's a real challenge. But what else is there to do but try to rise to the challenge?
It's still there. It's still there, I mean.
What's still there?
The whole institution.
Yeah, we're still here, and we got a lot of challenges, but we're working on it.
What are the challenges?
I'll save the biggest one for the last lesson. Oh no, it's the next lesson, is it? It's like 9 and 10. Fictional Prabhupada's. No, the last one, called Your Srila Prabhupada. Yeah, it's in right at the end, actually. And I mentioned that book, Srila Prabhupada, the founder of Acharya Discount. It's in the summary of that book that the GDC published, written by Ravindra Prabhu. And very nicely elaborating on Srila Prabhupada's position as the founder of Acharya. Really thorough dissertation on it. I told Ravindra, because he wrote that in 2014, and I was traveling around with these starting in 2012 or into 2011. I said, your book is great, Prabhu, but it's written in a very high level of discourse. It's like reading a PhD dissertation. I mean, it's not. easy to follow. I mean, it's academic, you know. I mean, it's spiritual, but the language is academic. So I said, you know what I'm doing? I'm presenting the same thing, and I'm presenting a Prabhupada experience, but I'm just using everyday language, so the devotees can understand what I'm talking about. And he said, yeah, that's good. So, okay, all right. So that's fun. Is that right? Or no? Okay. 12 more minutes. To love is to cooperate. Yes, Prabhu, the mic.
Yeah, since I said independently thoughtful, I feel obliged to contextualize it a little bit.
Yeah, good.
Coming from Amsterdam, it's probably the most misquoted thing I've ever heard in my life.
Yeah.
20 years, 30 years in this. So the context is that Prabhupada wrote it to, I mean, I don't know exactly, because it's a long time when I
Can anybody do it? I can do it right now.
But I know it's still the essence of it.
Okay.
He wrote it to temple presidents.
Oh, okay.
And it was something about that they had to go to the mayor and ask for permission.
Oh, right, yeah.
And he said, I want independently thoughtful men. So it had nothing to do with anything of authority. Like, oh, you know, I can go against the president or the GBC. It had nothing to do with that. It is just to do with, you know, like you said with New Vrindavan. Go to the farmers. Ask them. That's what he meant with independently thoughtful men. They asked something about growing vegetables, and then they asked it to Prabhupada, and he said, why don't you ask the farmers around you, your neighbors? They know the land.
Right.
Why don't you ask them? So he expected this man to be intelligent and cooperate with the local people, and like that be independently thoughtful, not that they ask everything to the GBC and everything to Prabhupada,
Okay.
but they figured things out for themselves and became, you know, responsible.
Okay, the context was, I think it was December 22nd, 1972, the letter to Karundar, about forget this centralizing, that one, famous letter. Forget this centralization, this will ruin our movement. Yes, it might be troublesome for every single temple to go and separately incorporate your local temple, but this will teach you how to deal with the local authorities and stand on your own 2 feet and learn how to do all these things. Don't just, and then you're responsible for fundraising for your own place. Not that you go begging from some central authority for funds, that you're some dependent, they're just begging like that. The only thing Prabhupada centralized was the BBT. That's all. Yeah, and also the management in India was different than anywhere else. He made this kind, I think in Bombay, it's kind of Bombay, right? This the where the authority resides with Indian management, GBC. Yeah. So independently thoughtful means you learn how to do things. You learn how to preach in the world. This is the real world, and you got to learn how to deal with it. As Prabhupada incorporated 26 Second Avenue, he got that attorney, Stephen Goldsmith, who was sympathetic to spiritual nonprofits, and he drew up the incorporation papers, and they did it legally, and they were good. They were bona fide. Before we give you a chance, anybody else before we give Prabhu in? All right, you got it.
Yes. Yes, so we find in the nowadays societies, always two fighting with each other. Means the one who is employing and one who is unemployed, and the unions. And
Management and workers.
Right?
Yeah.
So there are two groups that are always trying to cooperate. isn't it?
Trying to work together.
Like to work together to get things solved, to get things done.
Yeah.
So in ISKCON you have also authorities, and you have people who work under them. So isn't it that to smoothen the cooperation, it's important that both of the parties are listening to each other,
Sure.
and there should be a representative of each of the parties that are sorting things out. Like in the unions, you have the union leader, and on the other side, you have the leader that represents all the corporations.
And you have the
So-
mediator too, that they agree to the mediator.
Yeah, they have to agree. And also, there should be transparency. So these kind of elements are
I mean,
necessary.
bargaining in good faith, not that you're trying to deceive the other side or something.
Transparency, yeah, it's like open books, it's
Yeah.
published minutes and things like that.
Oh, okay, right. Yeah.
So that smoothens the cooperation. So, therefore, I think to cooperate is important. But ingredients to be able to cooperate should be there, because you cannot demand cooperation if it has to come from one side. Or
Yeah, right. Cooperation doesn't mean the leader says, so, yeah, just cooperate with me. Just do what I said. What's the problem? No, that's not. You see, what you see, Prabhupada said, the materialists, let's look at that quote. This is Unity and Diversity quote. Yeah. The materialists cannot come into agreement with varieties. So, the collective bargaining that goes on between, management and labor, they're both out for sense gratification. There's no higher purpose that they're both trying to achieve together. I mean, there is a purpose that they want to produce, say, automobiles. That's where unions started in America, actually, in the auto industry. My god sister Leka Shrivanti's father, Walter Luther, he was the Gandhi of the labor movement. He was very austere. Anyway, that's a whole history. She wrote a book about it. And but they had this goal of producing cars. But Henry Ford started the whole thing. The car. He didn't invent the internal combustion engine, but he was the one that figured out how to mass produce cars. The Model T Ford. So, but he was producing them, and then he was just, the people who were building the cars, the workers, he was treating them like slaves, paying them hardly anything, and the working conditions were terrible, and so the workers rebelled, and they made a union. It was really bloody and everything. So their goal was, so the management's goal was to make as much money as possible and to minimize costs, even at the expense of the lives of the workers. So then the workers came in and, they said, no, you can't treat us like machines, we're people. So then they had to come into some agreement. So even in the material sense, the workers have needs, interests, concerns, and so does the management, and they have to work together to make it work. Now, in Krishna consciousness, the higher purpose is to please Krishna, and everybody's a Vaishnava, so all the Vaishnavas have to be respected. It's like we say, Vanchakalpa, Turubhyascha. So Prabhupada is saying the materialists cannot come into agreement with varieties, because everybody always has their own agendas and self-interests, and it's so hard to even work out these contracts. But if we keep Krishna in the center, then there will be agreement in varieties. This is called unity in diversity. So we might have different ideas. Agreement in varieties means we might have different ideas of how to serve Krishna, but we trust those intentions of each other. That, when this devotee says something and I don't agree with it, but I trust his intention, his intention is not just to do something for sense gratification, but his intention is to actually do it that way because he truly thinks that's the better way to serve Krishna. So, yeah, that's called unity and diversity. We have different ways of doing things, that's all. And if we still can't get along, then Prabhupada would say, okay, you work over here, you work over here. But don't stop serving Krishna. I am therefore suggesting that all our men, Prabhupada said this should be the theme of every GBC meeting in Mayapur, every AGM, every annual general meeting. This should be discussed, how to have unity and diversity. Yeah, he said that in 73. Right. Because Prabhupada knew that was the key to keeping this movement together. And Prabhupada, he provides the unity amidst the diversity. He's the one we all have in common that we're trying to please. So if we remember that, then we have a chance of not just... Because the Kali Yuga, the forces of Kali Yuga, they try to tear us apart and make us, divide us, and make us at each other's throats. But unity and diversity mean we find a common cause in preaching Srila Prabhupada and Lord Krishna.
But in case of Ford, I also...
We have 1 minute.
In case of Ford, it was also that the employees could not afford the car they were building. And when Mr. Ford was convinced that it was better to pay them more, and so they could also afford a car.
Yes, that's true. Yeah, even in the material sense, right? So everybody has interests, concerns, but in spiritual life, our interest and concern is how we can help each other serve Krishna from our different positions. And tomorrow, before the, oh, here's the I'll just read the transition. Transition. Before we look at different ways to access and develop our individual loving relationship with Srila Prabhupada, in the next lesson, we'll identify and dispel some unconscious misconceptions we may have about him. It's called fictional Prabhupada. So that's tomorrow morning, 7:45. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.